Today, I'm very happy that we're doing policy and the influence of policy within midwifery. And I'm also very grateful for Mike and for Clare as well for giving up their time to come and do this for us today, because as you're probably aware, there's a lot going on in the midwifery world at the moment with policies and things changing. And I think it would be really good to hear from the experts today, and also to get your ideas too. So from that, we've spoken about NMC code and confidentiality and that it's a principles-based. I am now, if we're ready, going to hand over to Clare and Mike. I will let them introduce themselves, but thank you both again for coming today, because I do know how extremely busy you have been. So over to Clare and Mike.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you, Caroline, for organising this session. And we're really pleased to be able to be here and to talk to you all. And, I'm Clare Livingstone. I'm the Head of Professional Policy and Practice at the RCM. I'm a midwife by background, and I've been at the RCM for, oh gosh, too long to remember, over 10 years in fact. But yeah, I've worked on both sides, both the trade union and the professional side, and I'm currently working quite a lot on policy with Mike.
Do you know what?
And we'll present to you today this session. I'll talk for a little while, but we'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So we will be having a breakout session about halfway through for you to get into groups and have a bit of a chat about some of the themes of running, and we'll explain that in a little while. So policy and influencing. I mean, this is something. If you could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Policy is everyone's business. I mean, this is just something that we all live with every single day at work, in our communities, the economy, and how we live our lives. And it's just so important that we have an understanding of how important it is and the ways in which we are able to influence policy as midwives. It guides all of the processes that we work with. So in the workplace, you'll be well aware of guidelines, whether those are around medication, procedures for handling baby loss and bereavement, handling fetal remains, birth registration, screening, safeguarding. The list is absolutely endless. And all of these policies are agreed through a process. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the consultation processes and other ways of influencing policy, be that government or more local levels. There's a lovely quote here, which about public policy is about translating values into action. And really here we're talking about translating RCM values, your values as members of the RCM into policy, and some of the best ways that we're able to do that. In terms of influencing, it's making sure that policy is well informed by you as professionals, and making sure that the values that we hold as a profession, which are around fairness, around equality and equity, feed into the policy as it's being made. So if you go to the next slide, please. Amplifying midwifery voices. And this is part of our strategy, and we need to be absolutely sure that midwives are at the table where decisions are made, whether that be around paying conditions, and we absolutely feed into consultations and processes around pay and conditions. The RCM is a trade union. We work together with our partner trade unions and with the TUC But in terms of negotiating, we put forward evidence to the pay review body, and we are very much at that table negotiating on your behalf. Other regulations, professional standards, service reconfigurations where those happen locally, these are consulted on. And very often these are public consultations, so it might be that there are professions that are involved in these consultations, and the public may be involved in this as well as other stakeholders are. It's, again, to reiterate, it is just so important that the midwifery voice is amplified, and if we don't make the right arguments, then somebody else will. And you know, that could be anybody, but you know, it could be other interests who are less well informed. It might be the bean counters say, well, there isn't enough money for that. Well, we know that investing in midwifery services and in prevention, and it pays off in the long term. So we need to make these arguments really clearly. Next slide, please. So who needs to know? I suppose the point I wanted to make here was around why we have consultations, and where these apply. And that is that all government departments and public bodies do consult, and there are various ways in which they do this. And so the RCM as a stakeholder is recognised and approached for comments on policy changes, and these come around if there's a parliamentary inquiry. They will take evidence on bills and other department business, select committees, and APPG stands for All Party Parliamentary Group inquiries, and these are cross-party meetings that take place between MPs, where a whole range of different things are discussed. There are APPG groups on maternity, which the RCM, I know that Mike will be able to talk a lot more about this one, but the maternity APPG is supported by the RCM. We have a great deal of influence there. Yeah, NICE, the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, they will consult on guideline changes, and the RCM provides input into those. So we will be asked to provide evidence in a response to consultations on all kinds of things. We've just put one in around ectopic pregnancy, for example. Other arm's length bodies, so the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition reports periodically on different aspects of nutrition and where it might relate to infant feeding, for example, or healthy weight in pregnancy. That is something that we would be very interested in saying something about. We are the expert voice, and so we have a great deal of credibility with these bodies, and they look to us for our input. ICBs, local authorities and NHS trusts, these are of course local and will carry out local consultations. That might be something somewhere where your own RCM branch gets involved, might wish to put in a submission on behalf of the branch if, for example, there's a reconfiguration happening in your service, or some kind of change to working patterns. Management locally in a trust might carry out a consultation around, say, for example, on calls and how that's going to operate or might change and affect people in their working lives. And a consultation will be carried out, and your branch might get together and decide on the sorts of responses that members wish to put in. At the RCM, we have a sort of process in place for handling consultations, so they come in to a central point, and then we would allocate that to the most appropriate person at the RCM who will be best placed to respond. Could we have the next slide, please? Over to you, Mike.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So my name is Mike Indian. I am the Public Affairs Advisor for the Royal College of Midwives, and that role is quite a wide-ranging one. So I focus on what's primarily known internally as our political influencing work. So that's working with the various politicians across all 4 nations in which we operate in, but also the ministers, the civil servants as well. It's a mixture between a sort of comms and policy role, and I've been doing this for 15 odd years now as well. So I'm going to talk sort of structurally around the kind of public policy area. And as Claire's already said, there are a number of consultations that RCM is involved in. We have dedicated teams in the central function that kind of look after this. So we have our employment relations team under our director of employment relations, Emma Jenkinson, that looks after things like pay and conditions, which is obviously very important to the work we do as a union. Claire's team, as the title would suggest, professional policy, very important there. A lot of stuff that comes out from the regulators, but also the NHS as well, that requires that specialist knowledge. And of course, public policy, and this is kind of belongs to different people as well. This is where my interest intersects as well. And this, of course, is perhaps best encapsulated at the moment by the ongoing reviews into the maternity services that we've seen virtually every part of the UK too. So a lot of my involvement in consultations at the moment is dealing with the AMOS review internally, because obviously that's reporting to the Secretary of State. The first thing to say is that we have a wide range of stakeholders in public policy. It's often the most impactful lever as well, because it reflects what the priorities of what the government want to do, whereas the other ones tend to be far more detail orientated, far more specialist in that regard too. And although, you know, we're going through quite an unusual period of scrutiny at the moment for maternity services, and also a huge reorganisation of the NHS being merged back into central government too. So for a while we've been dealing with effectively the department as having a strategic oversight role, and NHS England being an implementation and effectively day-to-day manager of the health service in England too. So we're having to deal with that sort of reorganisation, as well as the ICBs going through that too. But also we have every different devolved competence has its own health system, its own ministers and respond to that, its own civil servants, its own systems to deal with. So in addition to the work that Clare and I do, we each have our country teams as well. So our country directors in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland that look after each of these areas. And these are often individuals, so Jackie Lambert, Julie Richards and Dale Spence, who have very good political connections or very good knowledge, actually having worked in that central bit of government, which is very invaluable. Helpfully, though, because devolution is not an equal thing, although healthcare is fully devolved, things like employment law are not. So that is still set in Westminster. So a lot of it still comes through the central body and governments. And so I'm going to talk basically about 3 types of public policy consultations: those that are done by governments themselves, those that are done by the legislatures that oversee the work of those governments, and then there's the unofficial kind of third party avenues, which are far more complicated. And we've got good examples of each of these on the go at the moment, and Claire's done a number of work of this in the past. Governments don't always call a consultation. In Whitehall, for example, there is meant to be something called a green paper that's put out, which is basically the idea is that the government says, this is our initial thinking on this, we want to gauge what you think. The consultations that run frequently each year that you might, most important ones, think, for example, usually centre around things like finances and the budget. So the finance departments, the Treasury, for example, will ask for views. A wide range of organisations will feed into that, but they can also be called calls for evidence, reviews. There's different synonyms for them as well, but the common theme will be there will usually be some sort of portal or email address and terms of reference that will stipulate what you can feed into as well. And it's important to say that even if there is a particular exercise that isn't openly advertising for a point of view, you can still send stuff in. This is obviously, the clue is in the name, in public policy. We want to try and shape names, but realistically, the kinds of individuals and organisations that engage with are those that would have vested interests in this as well. So we've referenced the budget there, but of course there was the nursing and midwifery strategy that DHSC was doing last year. RCM took the decision not to take part in that because we felt that midwifery was being suborned too much within that as well, and I still believe that was a very difficult but right decision for us to make. Government consultations, funny enough, I actually married to a civil servant who did a lot of these as well. And I can assure you, they do read the consultation responses. So the government will usually have a set window for them. They will allow you to submit responses, asking usually very specific questions. It's usually key to say you don't have to answer all the questions as well. It's usually best to pick and choose and then try and frame your answers in the way that you'd like to do that. And I've done a number of these over the years too. There's usually a character or word limit that you can do as well. They usually really value expert and opinion too, and what we would call lived experience from experts in that field. So, for example, at the moment, the AMOS review has a window open for staff to contribute, but also individuals, organisations through their central email address as well, though it's not been terribly well promoted. So governments will then look at these responses, collate them, and then publish usually a summary of the feedback they've received. So that will include things simple as we had X number of responses on these issues, and then the government will give its view on whether or not it will act on those responses as well. So it's quite a transparent and good process, and it's how certainly this government, the UK Labour government, has liked to operate with. We've seen a lot of things, for example, around the Employment Rights Act, which has been a huge thing for our trade union colleagues at the RCM as well. Huge amounts of the Make Work Pay plan are going to be implemented via not just through what's called primary legislation, but through consultations with business, with other organisations as well. So, for example, RCM, we're very keen on additional flexibility, and we're very keen to see the actual flexible work stuff coming in. But that was a wide-ranging set, and government is doing that through a series of stages. Even though the bill has passed, there's still further bits to come. Parliamentary is far more about oversight. There are, in every devolved legislature and in Westminster, committees that oversee the work of government. So MPs, these are made up of MPs and peers. These have standing. They examine either select committees that examine the specific remit of a government department, or have a cross-cutting remit. So there is a committee, for example, that looks at the whole sweep of public expenses called the Public Accounts Committee as well. But more often than not, they're judged by departmental responsibilities. So, for example, the Health Select Committee is one in which we spend a lot of time focusing. There are also committees in both houses of Parliament. So there are committees made up of MPs, peers, and MPs and peers, and there can be ad hoc committees as well. The common thing is this, that they have a specific remit. They have authority to investigate, collect evidence, report, and then to make those, and the government has to respond to their recommendations. It doesn't have to accept them. And Claire's going to touch on an example of a recent Select Committee report, which RCM played a significant part over the summer before I started there as well. For me, I think the crucial difference to say about the second and third channels is that the committee's work is covered by what's called parliamentary privilege. And this is essentially meaning that people that speak to the committee or give written evidence to the committee in a formal meeting setting, they cannot be libelled, that you can speak frankly in that situation as well. So if you wish to say something candid and the committee then publishes your advice and someone goes, oh, I don't like the fact you said that, you're essentially protected from legal action. It's a very important parliamentary freedom that applies to the work of committees, but does not apply to anything else, including government consultation responses as well. But it's a good reason to, if there's a select committee inquiry into something, so we just had one at NHS Estates at the start of the year, any evidence we did give into that would have been covered by parliamentary privilege, and I'm happy to talk a bit more about that. The other important thing that the committees can do is that they don't just look forward, they also look at current events, but they can also do what's called post-legislative scrutiny, which isn't often done, but it's often useful. And this often happens in the House of Lords, where they will take a particular act or a particular area and look at it in retrospect. So the House of Lords each year has what's called 4 ad hoc select committees, and these could be on anything. So it may be one year that they do a specific committee on maternity services. They haven't done it in the past, but they can get very specific, and that committee will sit for a year, hear evidence, produce a report. That report then goes to government, and having the voice quoted in that and evidence from organisations like RCM is significant. And of course, if you've published your evidence that's out there, that will be quoted in the list of the committee's report as well. Unofficial channels these are manifest, these are multitude. I won't talk about them all. There are, to give you an idea, all party parliamentary groups, there are 800 of these. These are not official parliamentary bodies, despite what the name. They are cross-party interest groups. They're actually more accurately named in the devolved assemblies as kind of loose interest groups of MPs that come together. So, for example, there is one about maternity services that is very well attended, about 60 MPs and peers and members of that. RCM is what's called the Secretariat, so we help steer the programme of work for that group. These committees range around, a huge variety of areas and behave in a variety of different ways. Some of them behave like select committees will conduct inquiries, collect evidence, and publish reports. We're doing something very similar on this for our next meeting for the maternity APPG, where we're going to do a short note to the Health Secretary on safe staffing levels, which is reflective of our campaign in there as well. But there are also individual politicians that will sometimes do a survey of their constituents as well. So a good examples with the assisted dying bill, a lot of MPs found a helpful way around that was to collect views from their constituents on a particular issue as well. So it is not unheard of. You might see your local MP might say, I want to hear your views on maternity services in the area. These are largely informal processes. They may lead to a publication, but they are very much in the gift of the organisations as well. Now, this isn't to say you shouldn't participate in them. Obviously we do as well, but just to say you don't have that parliamentary privilege protection. So it might just be best to mind P's and Q's in that situation as well. But again, it can be very useful. In fact, again, as Claire's going to refer to, she's got a good example actually of, I think it's the pre-term report, but there was a report, there's going to be a parliamentary debate very soon from the birth trauma group's report from the last parliament about a maternity commissioner that has accrued 100,000 signatures and will be debated in Westminster in the coming weeks. That's a great example of how APPGs, if they're seriously organised, can really have clout on big issues. Finally, very briefly, third party, and this is not parliamentary or government, this is anything else. This can be organisations, think tanks, it can be commissions. There is an organisation called Policy Connect that runs a very large number of APPGs, and they behave essentially like commissions and select committees. My colleague Heather Bauer and I are going next week to give evidence, and I say this as I'm talking to a bunch of students today, on midwifery education next week at Greenwich University. Heather is very keen to ensure that the report that goes, it's quite a weighty body in that regard. Its report will definitely be read. It's a very professional outfit, but again, no parliamentary privilege applies, and a lot of think tanks will, they often have particular political slants or agendas that they want to further. Again, there's a line to be walked here between behaving like parliamentary select committees. The last thing I will touch on very, very briefly, although I haven't included it on the slides, is what's called secondary legislation. Now, this is kind of where the world of more technical professional knowledge intersects with public policy. So this is actually how the government makes the majority of its decisions. These are very specific technical instruments that will often apply to anything from, say, the level of benefit it could be applied to. So there'll be so for example, there are different bits of primary legislation that relate to midwifery, coming up to the 90th anniversary of the Midwifery Act 1936, which was the advent of a fully paid, fully salaried midwifery profession as well. So a significant anniversary for this year. Government will often have mechanisms for amending that using existing legislation where they can make regulations and put these before Parliament. Again, these can be consulted on. They may issue what's called a draft SI. There isn't a formal process for this, but it's something that it's to keep an eye on. It's often how a lot of change, a lot of technical stuff will come through. So particularly with the Employment Rights Act, that contains 60 what's called delegated legislative powers relating to a whole variety of areas, and of course that would reflect people working in every professions across the UK. There's a great interest to us and our colleagues in the wider trade union movement. I'm going to stop there because I've done my monologuing for a long time and hand back to Claire.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was really useful, lots of information. And yeah, thank you. We thought that it would be a good idea at this point to take a little break and for you to gather into your groups and discuss some of the points we've raised already and come up with some ideas. So if the breakout rooms will be set up in a moment, but if you would like in your room to discuss with others some ideas for influencing, how you think you might be able to influence, whether that's locally within your trusts or ideas of how you can get involved with the RCM in terms of influencing. The major ways you can begin to influence policy as RCM members is through your branch, through your local branch in the workplace. I don't know if you've already familiarised yourself with that, met your local stewards or maybe learning reps, but our structure as an organisation, we're a membership body at the RCM is made up of our members are organised into local branches, and each workplace has a local branch, and that meets every year to kind of constitute itself with an annual general meeting, and then reps are elected by the members locally, and those reps are able to influence quite a bit actually, and will be meeting regularly with heads and directors of midwifery, and also the trust board. There's a seat on what we call staff side meetings. It's a joint committee with management, and RCM reps take their place at that table, where lots of decisions are made around finance and various other policies that will affect maternity services. And it's so important that midwives are represented at that level, not just by the directors and heads of midwifery, which is also essential, but by the RCM and RCM branch. And it may be something that you might think about getting involved with as you qualify and go forward in your careers, because your contribution is absolutely vital. And so we would really encourage that, and we'll support you to do it too. There's lots of training and heaps of resources, and in addition to that, protected time in order to carry out that work on behalf of your fellow members at the RCM. And by protected time, I mean you are given time, hours during a working day to do it. So it's not a voluntary role. It's a role that is taken very seriously and is actually protected in law, that you can be a trade union representative, and you get time off to do it. So in terms of influencing locally, that's one really good way. Another good way might be, especially around in terms of student finance, is simply trying to speak with your own MP. And that might involve writing to your local MP. You can find out who they are. I can't remember. Mike can chip in a moment and tell me how you find the details of your local member of Parliament. But it's a great way of making your voice heard. And members of Parliament want to hear from you. They want to hear from us, because they're not experts in maternity services, but you are. And you know what's happening on the ground in your, there you are. Thanks very much, Mike. There's a link there in the chat, so that if you put in your postcode, it'll tell you the name and the contact details for your local MP, and you can write to them or even visit them in their surgery. Even better, go and see them face to face and talk to them about what's going on. And if you've got concerns, or if you want to raise any particular issue, then I really do recommend that you go and talk to them yourself. They will listen, and they will value what you think, because you're a constituent and they depend on you. They depend on your vote, actually. Every election you might see them out canvassing and campaigning to be re-elected. And as constituents, you hold a lot of power, probably more than you actually think. And they rely on that. And they also rely on your expert voice, so that they can speak with and they're well informed on these subjects, and they're expected to be. They're expected to know what's going on in their local communities and in these public services such as maternity. So preparing to be a policy influencer. By that I mean somebody, in a way that you're able to get your point across really effectively. Organisations ask for our opinions, as I said, because as midwives, we're the experts on this, and they can tell the difference between kind of professional lobbyists and these slicker organisations that try and put forward a campaign, and the real voice, the real authentic voice that you have, that isn't window dressing. You speak with real knowledge and understanding of what these issues are, and so it's important that you put those views and those opinions across. The RCM, we will engage with members, so we make sure that when we put forward a response to a consultation, that we are getting the information that we need from members. And so sometimes we'll go out and ask members. We might do that via social media. We might put something out on Instagram or Facebook and say, you know, are you interested in this subject? And would you be able to contribute to a consultation response? We will sound out our reps and the branches and find out what their views are. We have partner organisations such as the RCOG and others. Maternity Action are partners. We often will speak to one another and share responses so that we're all speaking with a collective and a stronger voice on subjects. And we have networks and one voice coalitions, again, with like-minded partners, will often strengthen the message that we want to put across by all speaking together on it. In terms of systems for responding, this is about consultations that NICE and government, Department of Health and Social Care will carry out consultations. And these consultations come to us directly, and we'll either write a written submission or we'll complete an online form or sometimes give oral evidence to inquiries. And we will publicise these on the website. So you can take a look at the RCM's website and you will see some of the responses that we've put forward. And we're just going through a bit of a refresh of that system, so to make it a bit more transparent and a bit more inclusive, so that you'll be able to see what the consultations are that are live at this present time and how you as individuals could contribute if you wanted to. Next slide, please. What makes a good response? And this applies to everything. This applies to a conversation that you might have with a local politician, or whether it's a consultation formal response. Explain who you are and why you want to respond to something. Who are you representing? Are you there representing a group of student midwives? Are you there? It might be a neighbourhood consultation. It might be something that's going on in your community about a community centre that you feel is important, like a family hub or something like that. So explain why it's important that you're getting your message across. And be clear and accurate and concise too, because policymakers, as I'm sure Mike knows, as his wife is a civil servant, they don't have a great deal of time. They need it to be put really concisely what you want to say. Avoid professional jargon, because just generally speaking with someone who doesn't know very much about a subject, you know far more. So avoid the professional jargon and any abbreviations. You need to explain those before. Reference any position statements. If you've had a look at the RCM website, you will see there's a number of position statements where we will take a line on something, be that infant feeding, or it might be, there's a number of position statements up there that you can look at for a view on the policy. Mine's gone completely blank about position statements, but there are a lot there which give a line on something that, on a topic that might be a little bit controversial, and divide opinion. And so we want to be clear as an organisation what we stand for, and that can guide any submissions that we make. Of course, you want to make sure that any response is representative of best practice and to be informed by diverse communities that we represent. And that's really important, that responses are very, very well informed and represent a diversity of opinion and are equalities aware. Also, if we go on to the next slide, please, align any response with back one, two. That's the one. It's going quite quickly, isn't it? That's it. Thank you. Yeah, so this is just a quick summary of our current campaign asks. So it's a table that probably won't make a lot of sense to you right now, but essentially the RCM is campaigning to improve working lives amplify the voices of our members, and build maternity communities. And under this, we have a key campaign ask, which is around safe staffing. Safe staffing equals safer care. And, you know, this is a message that we are really reinforcing at the moment. It is, as we all know, absolutely vital. We can't provide safe services to women and families without safe numbers of midwives in the right place at the right time with the right education. Amplifying midwifery voices. We are a learning profession. We want to be able to improve health and prevention, and we're campaigning on our workplace, which is a birthplace, and we need to make sure that the workplace is fit for staff, with the right equipment, the right resources, decent estates, buildings that have roofs that don't leak, and you know, are appropriately equipped, because this is you know, has to be for safety, and as a birthplace it absolutely should be. Next slide, please. So these to follow are some examples of where we have made a submission on a consultation, and the sorts of outcomes that we can expect. So recently we gave evidence to the Competition and Markets Authority, which is a government arm's length body, and it held an inquiry into the formula milk market, and the RCM was very concerned about formula milk pricing, how affordable that is for many families. Find that they're priced out. Healthy Start vouchers, for example, don't cover it. The value of a Healthy Start voucher is not equivalent to the cost of formula feeding a baby, which is obviously what some mothers choose and may need to do, and that is fundamentally unfair. We put in a very comprehensive response to this consultation, both in writing, and we gave oral evidence as well, pointing out the unfairnesses and in the market, and how some of the marketing practices of formula milk companies. So, for example, in hospitals, you will see that there's pre-prepared bottles of milk that will be given out to parents on wards, and these prepared bottles are branded. They might be SMA or Aptamil, and which are the most expensive brands. And one of the arguments that we made to the Competition and Markets Authority was that implied some kind of endorsement from health professionals that we were giving it out because it was better than the other ones that you might buy in the high street, which are cheaper. And that once babies were already having that brand of formula, then parents felt under pressure to continue to give them that brand of milk, even though they couldn't afford it, and that some very unsafe practices were resulting from that, which included watering it down, actually, and other things that just were not safe, and watering down the milk or keeping it beyond when it should have been used by. So lots of these arguments were made, and the government have finally responded and come back to us to the report that the CMA gave to the government with its recommendations, and the government accepted some of them around the marketing of formula milk and some of the sort of pricing practices in shops, supermarkets. But one of our main recommendations that we made as a college was that there be standardised labelling of infant formulas that were being provided in the NHS. So we didn't want any of that branding. We could have plain packaging of that formula milk so that parents didn't feel under pressure in that way. But that was rejected. So we were quite disappointed about that. You win some, you lose some. So, but we'll keep going. We're not going to give up on it. But that is something that we we feel very strongly about, and we will keep campaigning on it. Another one here, there's a nice consultation on draft guidance around intrapartum care for water births, and that's it's around the second stage of labour, and a consultation on a draft guideline. And this was accepted, and a change followed to the NICE guideline following an RCM response. And that advice around the increased risk of snapping of the cord before cord clamping, which could be resolved by clamping the cord sooner with little long-term adversity for newborns. And that was an argument that was made by the RCM and some of our professional experts in that field, and NICE have accepted it, which is great. You know, it's really worthwhile. It shows just how effective you can be when you put forward these arguments. Next slide, please. We gave evidence to a select committee inquiry into Black maternal health, and the RCM there emphasised women's lived experience, and that had to be at the centre of efforts to improve cultural competency within maternal care, and that co-production was the best way to ensure that happened. And that, again, has been a very strong argument made and was reflected in the Black maternal health report that came out of that inquiry. So the RCM is being heard. The voices of midwives are being heard at this level of government, which is so important. Research by the RCM found that more than half of midwives are considering leaving because they fear patient safety is being compromised by poor staffing levels. Again, we made that argument to this committee, and it was written into the report. Next slide, please. House of Lords inquiry was held into preterm birth. Mike mentioned this. Again, the evidence that we gave both in writing and in person to that committee was contained in the report. And that report is a very, very strong report, and was debated in Parliament. And, you know, again, it's amplifying midwives' voices, midwives' concerns at the highest level. It really is. Next slide, please. This one is for Mike. It's around the 10-year health plan. Just a few words. I'm conscious we've gone a bit over time. I hope that's okay for everyone.
Just briefly, so I mean, there's not a lot we can say specifically about the 10-year health workforce plan at the moment. The government published its NHS 10-year plan last year, and we had we submitted to that. We did quite a wide-ranging submissions before I started at RCM, but it was a good example, I think, of how we try and marshal different pieces of information together in a concrete document that we feel, and obviously there is strength, I think, in getting this information centrally, but of course as a grassroots organisation we want people to feed in through that. And of course, you know, the key bit of what we've said to the AMOS review, for example, has been passing on specific bits of feedback from frontline midwives as to how the process often is engaging them as well. I would say that with the workforce submission, we often operate at very tight timelines on this as well. And despite the fact that we've talked about a process, particularly in relation to public policy, there may be a set window, but governments often, the timing of consultations is often less than transparent in terms of responses. So it isn't a simple case that, so for example, with select committees, when the government gives a response to the when a select committee gives a report to government, they're given 2 months to respond normally. Then when they have to come back in as well, there isn't any such time limit in terms of when the government has to issue its own responses to many other things. So if you input into a central consultation, it may come out perhaps a year, 6 months, even 2 years later as well. And So this is part and parcel of why, even though we've done a submission, we often try and keep up pressure on it as well. And of course, we may not necessarily get the answer that we want, but ultimately, until the decision is taken, it isn't set in stone. So at the moment, we're waiting to see what the workforce plan will say. One of the key asks we had in that was that midwifery would connect specifically to that and not be seen as a separate thing, given the fact they're developing a national plan. So another thing is also joining the dots between different things that governments and departments often do as well, because silo working is something that is quite prevalent inside of Whitehall. But as Claire says, we're waiting for the 10-year workforce plan. They said spring, so let's see what happens.